Okay, today I'm with Alastair Down on the Oxfordshire-Gloucestershire border.
Yep.
Thanks very much for agreeing to talk to us today, Alastair. Now, you've just won the Racing Writer of the Year for the 5th time. If I'm correct, the first time was in 1994.
Yes.
What's kept you ahead of the game for so long?
I don't know. I think this one was probably a long service medal. I suppose it's not a question of being ahead of the game, because there are plenty of other very good people at it, but you should get better at something as you do it for a longer time, shouldn't you? And I love doing it. It's as simple as that. I'm paid to pursue a passion. It's the old story. I've never found a better way to put it, but that is the truth. It hardly represents a day's work. Not that I'd like people to think I do nothing, but I couldn't sit in an office 9 till 5. And nobody in an office could have me sitting there 9 to 5.
So it started somewhere. So what was the flame that lit the passion for horse racing for you?
My father, God bless him, Gordon Down, worked in the city at Lloyd's, insurance brokers or the insurance conglomerate. He'd come from an extremely humble background, didn't really have much choice what he did after the war, which he fought in for 5 years. He loved his horse racing, and he'd come home on a Friday night and Saturday I'd go down and get what was then the Midday Standard, London Standard, which was a pure racing edition, unbelievably, which Midday Standard was out at 8 in the morning. Go and get a copy of that, and he'd look at the form and sit in front of the telly, leaping up and down, shouting and screaming, which wasn't like him at all. And I would, age 4 or 5, be on the arm of his chair, and all dads being heroes to their sons, which he remained through to the age of 88 when he died. I thought, well, it's good enough for dad, it's good enough for me. And I got very interested quite young. And I had my first ever bet in the 1961 Grand National on a horse called Nicholas Silver, who was a very pale grey, a white grey, and it won. And I thought, toddle this, you just pick the white one, and you give Dad tuppence in old coins, and he gives you half a crown or something. So I thought, this is the future.
So was it the gambling or the spectacle?
Well, I wasn't the gambling age 5, no. It was the excitement, actually. Jump race in particular, my late brother was keen as well and used to keep lots of immaculate records of things. And the 3 men in the family were all keen. My sister, to this day, disdains it but understands that it isn't quite as appalling as she thought. And my mother would have 3 bets a year, and they always won, much to my father's huge annoyance.
Now, I read that you chose York University because you could reach 8 racecourses within 50 minutes. Is that actually true?
It is absolutely true. I remember driving up from, living those days on the Kent coast, and I got in my little black Mini and drove, as always, far too fast up to York. It still took a fair time. Walked in to see Professor Atkinson, the philosophy professor, who was a charming man. And he said, why York, Mr. Down? And I said, well, I can get on 8 racecourses in under an hour. And he said, see you in a couple of months' time. That was it. That was the interview.
So you obviously had a massive love for horse racing already by that point. Was there ever a temptation to not even bother with the university and go straight to some aspect?
No. I wanted a degree that, on reflection, of course, I did absolutely nothing at all for 3 years except really go racing. I mean, I used to come down for sort of months racing in January, February with mates down in this neck of the woods and go to. I'd race from what was then the Schweppes meeting, the big handicap hurdle of Ryan Price fame in those days. Right through to Cheltenham and near the university. I think I went to 2 lectures in the last 2 years.
I was going to ask if racing helped or hindered your university education. You've already sort of
well, I didn't let the university education hinder the racing, put it that way.
Any particular tales you can tell us from those days? Any scrapes at university?
Oh God, endless. But I mean, I really went to university so little. I lived about 15 miles away. There was lots of student behaviour. And I raced assiduously at York, obviously, back the odd winner. But I mean, I also had my biggest disaster betting when I was 19. When I backed a horse in the Yorkshire Cup at 13 to 8 on, and I had plenty on it. 6 runners, and it was 5th of 6. And I had done my money for the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And I rang Dad a couple of days later. I said, oh, I've made such a balls of this. I've lost all my money, Dad. Oh, it's very bad luck. And about a week later, a cheque arrived for some of it. And we're not talking big sums, we're talking big sums for students. And I have never had an odds-on bet under rules since, and that is 43 years ago. And I think it was the cheapest day's punting I ever had. I had some good days, though, back to Towar to win the Ebor. I'll never forget, I had 11 quid, I think, which was a biggish bet, at 22 to 1 with one of the Yorkshiremen in the ring. And I disappeared off and had plenty of champagne and tottered down at the end of the day. And he said, been waiting for you, the silly bugger had a stupid sum, a silly sum at a silly price. But yeah, I cut a lot of teeth racing in Yorkshire, although really my home county of Kent. I was at Tunbridge School and I went racing at Lingfield a huge amount. And in those days it was called lovely Lingfield. It was the most picturesque racecourse in the country, you could almost argue, a fight with Goodwood perhaps, but it was just a paradise racecourse. And it died in 2 cuts. One was the 87 Storm, which wiped out all the trees, and the other was the all-weather, which for all its undoubted qualities, I'm sure, is not a thing of outstanding natural beauty. But it was a fabulous place. And in those days, the big hitters were people like Peter Caslett, the Royal Trainer at Fairlawn, which was near Tunbridge, a huge private house, where one of the Roux brothers was chef. The other Roux brother was chef at the British Embassy in Paris. And at Fairlawn, you'd have the Elizabeth Taylors, the Queen Mothers, and Noel Cowards all down for the weekend. Peter Caslett was a very intimidating, bushy, eyebrowed man, always in a bowler hat, tweed suit, real martinet. Sacked all the staff one day because he found a cigarette end in the yard. And then had to reinstate them in the afternoon. We discovered that it was being dropped by the postman. But he had great horses, and it was fascinating that the roof, I can't remember, it was Albert and Michel cooked for him, and the other one in the embassy at Paris. And in, I think, 66 or 7, the brothers went to Caslett and said, we'd like to start a restaurant. And Caslett and his chums raised 6 grand. And they opened up, I think, just off Sloane Square. And from day one, it was full of the richest people in England because they'd all either stayed in the embassy or stayed at Caslett's. And they paid, I think Rubens paid them, the backers back within 2 years. It was astonishing in the restaurant trade. And had gone on to be the great culinary revolutionaries of their time. And Roux Jr. is still residing at the Gavroche in Mayfair.
So you were keeping yourself in the best company in those days?
Well, I used to go to the pub called the Chaser near Caslett's Yard. Never been a better racing pub name to combine chasing and having a swift one to follow the beer down. I used to go in the public bar and listen to all the stable staff talking. Well, I was meant to be at school at the time, but I had a good arrangement with a local van hire company who had a contract in Gravesend, and their vans would go back to Tunbridge late at night, and the last van was under instruction to stop at the Chaser and pick this odious little child up, and it cost 50p to get back. It was great. And I also had a house down the hill, great friends of the family, a guy called Dick Howe, who'd been the escape manager at Colditz, would you believe? And he would run me back on Saturday afternoons when I wasn't playing rugby or something silly like that. So I had it all quite well organised. I didn't let school I've never let education get in the way of racing.
Now you mentioned briefly the bookmakers when you went to collect your bet after was it £22 on? Was the betting ring something you really enjoyed the character?
Yeah, I loved it. It was utterly different, and obviously the southern rings were different to up in Yorkshire and things like that. But it sounds very cliched and slightly rosy spectacle, but it isn't. It was populated with independent characters with a firm idea of running their own business, and obviously they laid money around the ring. In those days, all done by tic-tac, but they took their own view. There was no machine to play with. It was all, of course, blackboards and chalk, and I watched them coming in with those enormous joints and lugging in machinery, and I say to some of the older ones, but you miss your blackboard and chalk, don't you? Right, we do. Yes. But it was full of characters, and you know, the Southern Ring, I could name a dozen of them now. Some immaculate figures. They were hard old characters. Yeah. But you got to get to know them, but you knew all their faces. And of course, you ended up with your favourites. But yeah, you wouldn't cross them.
So when you left university, did you leave with qualifications that got you where you are now, or did you just leave with the experience you
God
needed?
knows, there's no qualification that got me where I am now. I left with a moderate degree, a 2-2 in politics and philosophy, and I went betting for 3 years. And after 2 years, I realised that I wasn't losing money, I was not going to make any. And I got a few people to invest in this venture. There were 2 of us, and we just, after 3 years, we gave, I suppose, 50% of the money back, and said, sorry, we're not good enough.
So when did you first combine your talent for written English with horse racing?
Well, I started work, I think, in 1980. Possibly 79, over at Halal Butchers in Battersea, the offices of Race Form, who made the form books. And it was positively Dickensian. High Stills quill pens wouldn't have touched it. You got paid about threepence every 2 months. It was horrendous, but you learnt quite a lot. Editing. It was editing what was then the Race Form notebook, which was comments from the likes of Walter Glynn, still blissfully going these days. But it got you an NUJ ticket, which allowed them to pay you nothing because they knew that's why you were there. And it allowed you to get a job in Fleet Street, without which no NUJ ticket membership, no job, because of all the closed shops that operated. And I went racing one day on a Saturday, ran into a character who was the racing editor of The Sun, and he said, oh, why don't you come work for us as a casual? I said, oh gosh, yes please. And I started the following Monday, I think. And you used to get, I've never been better off, you used to get 35 quid a shift. The Sun Racing Desk in those days had a full-time staff of about 8 and about 7 casuals, which I mean, it was like a sort of Cecil B. DeMille production. There was no work to do. My main job was to go at lunchtime to the pub, the first edition, at about 1 o'clock and order the drinks. And at about 3:30, 4 o'clock, my job, when they all went back to the office, was to get the sandwiches. Really nothing. No, I mean, you know, Claude Duval would do his piece of the paper, but that was, it might be 10 pars. Well, that was a par each for people to sub. It was an absolute racket, I cannot tell you. And you used to get paid in cash. You get a piece of paper, you'd done your sheet, you went up to a sort of Santa Claus in the sky on the 4th floor, he gave you 35 quid. Or if you did an alleged double shift in the summer, which meant sitting around doing the results in Windsor on a Monday night, you got 70 quid. I mean, I lived like a Maharaja. A bottle of champagne was only about a fiver in those days. And I did all right, as they say.